Hello, thanks for being here. We are here today to talk about that book and this man, Christopher Moore. He has written 16 books. They're all funny. And his novels range from vampire stories and gospel updates to Shakespearean rewrites and pleasant, if somewhat confounding, encounters with death.
Yeah.
Like many of his novels, like A Dirty Job, they're contemporary, but you've written a lot of novels that took place in the past, things like Fool, Lamb, yeah, and the new book, Noir, is also a trip to another time. It's your take on the hardboiled detective novel. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you about your book, but
No, you're telling them about the book.
Yes, it's set in post-World War II San Francisco. And like any good detective story, Noir features a bartender, his wisecracking sidekick, a mysterious dame, and there's also a buttoned-up general, a snake or two, and someplace called Roswell. In writing Noir, Chris was influenced by newspaper writer Herb Caen's columns about life in San Francisco after the war, and Chester Himes's novels, to get a feeling for shifting post-war racial and economic attitudes. You can still order signed copies of the book on noirlive.com. And
we should be able to hold that up. You guys are going to put that.
And that's it for an introduction. Here's the man, and let's just jump right into questions.
Let's do questions.
All right.
I'll do answers. You do questions.
Excellent. Good way to go. Now, I think the basic one is, after all the kind of novels you've written, why a detective noir hard-boiled book right now?
First, this is Richard Cadre.
Hi, I'm Richard Cadre. I forgot that part.
And he's written a bunch of books, Sandman Slim series being the most prominent probably, huh?
Yes.
You want anything else you want to talk about?
No, this is about you, man.
But I mean, just so you don't, we didn't just drag him off the street, although I've done that before.
Right.
Why a noir right now? Actually, I was going to write another Shakespeare book, but my publisher, when I sent him the proposal for that, said, no, we don't want that one right now. And I had done a little research on San Francisco in the 40s. I've lived in the city now for 12 years. And it's a really interesting period with what's going on in the city post-war, which I thought the best way for me to get that out to anybody is in a story, a funny novel. And I like the way people talk in movies in those days. So it was, a lot of it had to do the same way that I came to the Shakespeare because of the language and playing with the language. I came to the noir genre from playing with the language and the tough guy talk.
Which you can tell from the way the book is written.
Yeah, the strained metaphors and the stories told in present tense that happened in the past, which is really awkward, but is kind of funny when you hear it. So that's where I came to it. It was really from the language. And from the fact that my publisher said, no, don't write another Shakespeare book.
Don't write that other book.
Yeah.
And Herb Caen, for people who don't live in San Francisco, he was a massively popular and important columnist in the city for decades.
50 years. From more than that. From the 30s to the 90s, so 60 years. And he was sort of our Walter Winchell. He wrote man on the street stuff and always knew. The place we're sitting now, Tosca Restaurant in North Beach, he writes about Tosca and the people who owned it and all the characters that came in and out of here, like all the beat poets and writers came in and out of Tosca, and Vesuvio's across the street and city lights across the street. And so Herb was sort of the chronicler of what street life was like. And by street life, I don't mean underground street life, but just street life in general for 6 decades. As well as the economics and the society and the social aspects of what was going on in the city. Unfortunately, he published 2 books in 1947.
That was going to be my question.
And so I was able to say, well, this is when they were still fighting about the cable cars and traffic in 1947, but that's when they decided we're going to keep this route. And it's not going to go all over the city. We're going to keep enough for the tourists and the people who are nostalgic about it, but the rest of us have to get to work. Right. And so the routes that they set in 47 are still the same now. And
those cars from the 40s still run on special occasions.
Well, the ones that they built, the undercarriages are over 100 years old. They just build new cars on top of them at $1 million a piece. They hand make them. There's a workshop down in the Mission that they hand make the cars. but the steel part of them, I guess, is still the originals, going back to
it's wonderful.
the 19th century. So
That's
it's cutting
great.
edge 19th century transportation. Yeah.
So a little steampunk in there too.
Yeah. And so the part of the city that was fascinating in the books is we know the neighborhoods now, like New Yorkers know their neighborhoods. And San Francisco, we're all abundantly aware of the Tenderloin, which is sort of a tough neighborhood now. But in the 40s, it really wasn't. It became what it is now in the 40s because of the post-war economy and the way that the society was set up. So I will go on forever about that, but that's one of the things that I found interesting. And a lot of this book takes place in the Tenderloin, North Beach, Chinatown, which are sort of all adjacent to one another.
Yeah, kind of mushed together. Talk about Chester Himes, a writer I love.
Yeah, Chester Himes, most people know him from his Rage in Harlem series.
Right.
It was obviously set in New York. And the book that I sort of used mostly for reference in this was called If He Hollers, Let Him Go. And it's about an African-American welding crew in the shipyards of Los Angeles during World War II. And so I got the dialect and how they spoke from that, and how they were treated by the other people in the crews and how they treated each other and what their society was like, more or less. And that takes place, my main character, Sammy, in this is hurt. He's injured in a factory accident in Idaho where he grew up. And he can't get into the service when the war breaks out. But he comes to San Francisco thinking maybe he can get into the Navy because you don't have to walk that well to be in the Navy. And it doesn't work out. So he ends up in a shipyard at Hunters Point, where we built ships here in San Francisco. And because he's a smartass, the boss puts him in a crew of all African American guys because they did the sort of the worst part of the work. They put them on the interior chambers of the ship, welding like the air ducts and stuff like that, and the doors and all that, with these amazingly hot arc welders and this sealed thing. Toxic fumes. And 12 stories down in a ship. And so that's where Sammy ends up meeting the whole African American crew that's in this book is sort of a tangential part of society in post-war San Francisco.
That's great. That's a great period in the city. It was so it's completely different world here.
Yeah.
At that point, you can see it in. You can see if you want to see it for real, like films like what's the
Dark Passage is filmed 1947 on Telegraph Hill.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah. The Telegraph Hill, if you've never been to the city, is a really tall hill right in the middle of the city. You see it all the time. It's got a big sort of obelisk, quite tower on it, and it's 363 steps to the top of it. And people lived there. It was more or less a cheap neighborhood to live on the backside of Telegraph Hill in the 1940s. And the girl character, the love interest in Noir, lives there. And so poor Sammy, who's got a bad foot anyway, to see her has to go up 363 steps one side and then down 144 steps on the other side. And it's a fixture of San Francisco. In most of the city, you can see it from. And so it's a big fixture in this book. And that neighborhood was different then because it was very bohemian, and then at every place, there's almost no place that's bohemian now in San Francisco because it's so ridiculously expensive to live. But at that point, there were a lot of artists and writers that lived on that hill, and people that were just trying to make it. And the Cheese, the girl, is just a waitress at Woolworths at the counter, and she lives there. So I don't know. I guess you end up talking, especially us because we live here. You talk about the city a lot, but the book is about the characters and what they do.
Right, of course.
But the world they live in is a world that's just changed. The population, the African American population of San Francisco was 5,000 in 1940, and it was 35,000 by the end of the war. That's a huge percentage upgrade. And what happened was they offered jobs with housing to anybody, and Roosevelt signed an executive order, I think it was 8807, that said you are not allowed to discriminate by race. So all these people who were living in the Jim Crow South, basically in sort of modified sharecropping and all the sort of horrible conditions that attended that, they went a job with a place to live, where I make good money and eventually would get health care. They all moved west. So the whole Bay Area changed and remains different to this day because of the demographic changes that happened right after World War II and during World War II. And that Hunters Point to this day is still an African American neighborhood. The Richmond there was a Kaiser Permanente shipyard was there. That's still an African American town for the most part. Oakland's population changed.
Right.
Marin City, they were building Liberty ships in Sausalito, and Marin City is where the defense employees lived. So what we see now, most people that I encounter in the city don't know that that's why it is that way. I mean, the Chinese have been in Chinatown for 150 years, and the Italians have been in North Beach for 150 years, but the African Americans have been in their neighborhoods for a much shorter time, and it's sort of stayed that way. And then where you live, or near where you live in Japantown, totally changed.
Right.
You know, we know the Fillmore. Those of us of an age know it as a place where rock and roll happened, and before that, where jazz happened. Well, it was Japantown, and when they shipped all the Japanese off to the internment camps, all these African American defense workers went, "Oh, there's a place to live over there. There's empty houses," and so the Fillmore became a black neighborhood.
Right.
And in the 50s, the late 40s and the 50s, all these jazz musicians came into this black neighborhood. So you had this interesting phenomenon of these Japanese kids who came back from the internment camps and were growing up, and they're listening to Charlie Parker and Coltrane and all these right outside of their door, because now there's Bebop City is in the Fillmore, and all these jazz clubs are in the city. So it was there was a lot of interesting dynamic social things going on, and it was fun to set a story in that. To set a story in Chinatown is a different country. We're a block from it, and you feel like you need to have a passport to walk over to Grant Street. And it was just it was fun to write about that, to write about Sammy being in the Italian neighborhood on Grant Street, and if he walks across Broadway, he's in the Chinese neighborhood.
Yeah, you have a lot of that those cultural collisions throughout the book.
And they've been ongoing for years. I mean, you've had the Italian fishermen. Joe DiMaggio's father was an Italian fisherman, and DiMaggio and his brother became baseball players because they were like, "Oh my God, I do not want to be a fisherman." And they've been selling their fish to the Chinese for 150 years. So anyway, that was an interesting dynamic to explore at the time.
Excellent. You want to go to some fan questions?
Sure.
All right. Can you sign while you're
Yeah,
absolutely.
Questions?
All right,
absolutely.
Let's
I can totally multitask.
And I will ask some questions here. All right. Has anything you've written been optioned for a movie?
You know what? Almost all of them have been optioned. Some of them 6 or 7 times. But as we were talking earlier, the deals mean nothing until they turn on the camera. It's just me blowing smoke at my readers who want to see a movie.
Right.
There's been a lot. My first book sold 27 years ago for a film, and it's still never been made.
But you get checks. You get nice checks.
I got a nice check for that. I went from waiting tables to living like other people of my age.
You waited tables. That's brutal. That's brutal work.
It's great work to do when you're writing, though, because you always have cash. You're going to get one meal a day,
right? And
it's part time, making full time money. So I would write in the morning, and
but you got to deal with people, and that's sort of the cutoff for me.
Well, that was good for me. That was good for me. I had done those jobs that you would think would be conducive to being a writer, like night auditor in a hotel.
Yeah.
And you just get spooky. It's not good for you. I needed to be in some place that I was forced to interact and be creative, verbally, and also that you could be good at without it being hard. I mean, there's no excuse to not be a good waiter. You just need to. It's not a difficult
drop stuff.
Yeah, just it's as one of my friends in the business used to say, "Hey, look, we're not doing brain surgery here. We're giving people food and drinks." And there's a certain satisfaction. Writing is really hard. I still find it really hard.
Yep.
It's great to be able to go and do something and get paid for it that you're good at and doesn't require anything much more than showing up and being pleasant.
True.
And so I liked it. Of the many jobs that I did while I was trying to write, waiting tables was the one that was most conducive to doing it. And it kept me from turning in on myself too much. It made me, forced me to interact with people, because that alone time, I mean, I still, and I'm sure writers, I know writers that get to a point and they go, I can't spend any more time in a room by myself.
I got that with this last book.
And, And, Douglas Adams famously, started doing video games and stuff because he didn't want to be by himself anymore. And I get that. So having an avocation that also spurs that was not healthy for me. Yeah. I've rather long treatise on waiting tables, but yeah, I liked it. Nice. I did that.
Excellent. Another question: how did growing up in Ohio shape who you are today?
I think it's interesting because that has a real resonance with me politically right now, and where we are, because I'm always hearing about, everybody ignores the people working in the industrial Midwest and in steel towns, and I grew up in an industrial town and a steel town, and left in 1977 because it was obviously going to shit, and even the people that had those good jobs hated it. You could go; they were miserable. You would go to a bar. You can drink at that time you could drink when you were 18 in Ohio, and you could go to a bar on Saturday night, and if you sat for 15 minutes, you'd see a fight. There were very unhappy people in jobs that paid really well. And so I'm a little cynical now, having lived in California most of my adult life, because I think what it affects me is, look, I grew up son of a cop in a steel town. Don't romanticize it for me.
Right.
I did what you should do if you need to survive, which is leave. Which is not to say the people are bad. It's just simply to say this has been really over emphasized. And part of the reason I left Ohio was that everybody told me what I couldn't do. And when I got to California, nobody said that to me. If you said, hey, I want to own a carousel company and build, carousel horses, nobody's going to tell you can't do that.
Right.
But when I told people in Ohio I wanted to be a writer, I would have been better off to tell them I wanted to be a turtle, because they'd seen a turtle.
Right.
They had never seen a writer. They didn't know what that was, but they were pretty sure I couldn't do it.
And were you sort of being above your station by saying something like that?
Yeah. You just couldn't. It was just. I don't know if it was a class thing. I think it was just a joy of ignorance.
Yeah.
That sounds more bitter than I mean it to be, but that's how it affected me. Was I know where I came from and I know where I've gone to, and a lot of it was by transcending the attitudes that I was given by the people I was around. I had a creative writing teacher who, first day of class, said it takes, in high school, it takes certain disciplines and qualities for someone to be a professional writer. And Christopher Moore does not have those qualities. In front of 30 people, first day, because I had her for an advanced comp class, and she didn't like me. So, that's the kind of encouragement that I got. So
I actually dedicated one of my books to my English teachers who told me that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that's, I never, when I do go home, which is seldom now, I never fail to mention to the newspaper this teacher's name, who was wrong.
How do you keep creating these epic adventures with such original characters?
I Frankenstein the characters together.
All right.
Really. And I still. It's so funny that you agreed to do this, because I'm talking to another writer who knows all the things that I'm telling you, but I'm telling for you guys. You create a character because you need them to do certain things, and they've got to have a certain personality to do that, and it's more interesting if that's hard for them.
Right.
So if they have to overcome certain aspects. As fun as it is to watch James Bond, you pretty much know he's going to handle it.
Right.
But when you watch the kid in the first. What's the movie that they turn him into a secret agent off the street?
Like Cody Banks?
No. It's English. Come on, you guys, help me with it. Anyway, that when it's somebody who's not supposed to be there,
right,
it's interesting. And so I specialize in that. But as far as the personalities or the quirks and stuff, it's like I'll take one guy might be interesting.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to make an interesting character, so I'll take this characteristic from that guy and this characteristic from that guy and sort of put them together, and in addition to with what I need them to do. And so some of the characters are biographical, some more than others. When I did my whale book, I hung out with marine mammal researchers and a National Geographic photographer for a couple of seasons, research seasons. And when I started that book, I was going to be a book about whales. And when I met these people, I was like, no, this is going to be a book about whale people.
Yeah.
Because they were great people and they were fearless and totally unassuming. You know, they did stuff every day that the rest of us would just be wide-eyed and you know, losing our shit over. And they just took it in stride and they didn't brag about it, and they were sort of like they were the model of safety. You know, as John Steinbeck says, scientists are not looking for an interesting way to die. And so those guys ended up being really autobiographical, or not auto, but biographical in that book. And so sometimes you do pick aspects of people. Although the photographer, he's of English and Spanish descent, and in the book he's of Greek descent. So he started eating Greek salads, he said, to be more like the character afterwards. And I had to apologize to his mother for killing her off in the book. But so it's usually the Frankenstein process of piecing together different aspects of people's personality.
When Nabokov said his characters were galley slaves, but other writers I know just let the characters kind of wander through the book, telling you where they want to go. Are you one or the other? Are you in between?
Well, I have where I need them to go.
Right.
But, you know, and usually the ones that will manifest stuff that might change the arc of the story it's in dialogue. Is that you can't think of the next thing they're going to say, and it sort of defaults to the Raymond Chandler, when in doubt, have two guys come through the door with guns.
Right.
And one of my characters will say, well, what if we have a snake?
Right.
And then it's like, wow, that's going to take the thing in a whole different direction. So I do follow the characters to some extent, and I have a character that I've written. I'm now in my third book of him, and he's a Shakespearean fool, and he's really clever, much more clever than I am. You know, so it takes me 2 hours to figure out the perfect instant comeback that he might have. You know, and he'll take the stories in directions that I don't necessarily plan because I default with him to what's interesting for him to say, what's funny for him to say, and that will sometimes send the action in a different directions. It's a little bit of both, but you know, sometimes you got to hammer them back into where you need them to go. You know?
Yeah, but it's fun when they surprise you. That's when I'm doing my books, I always leave little holes in the story and character stuff, just so just to give them that room to say something or do some little thing.
Well, I was interested because I follow you on Twitter, and I was interested in I think your last. You were working on your last Sandman Slim book, and you talked about your outline. And
the brain map
you did
stuff.
the Scrivener outline or something, and you were just hammering scenes out. I was like, this dude's going to write a book in the time it takes me to do a chapter. Which, if you're writing fast, you kind of have to do.
I have to do my first drafts quickly.
Yeah.
That's just the way my brain works.
Yeah.
And then I fix it all.
Yeah. And so, but outlines aren't always, you know. I remember hearing Brian Garfield, who wrote the original Death Wish, say that he didn't do outlines because then his brain told him that he had already finished the book.
I've heard that from people.
Because he'd figured it out, and I have a little bit of that. But when you do a historically, a book based on historical events, like Sacre Bleu or Lamb, there's already an outline you have to follow.
Right.
And so those books tend to be really detailed in their outlines, and especially because Sacre Bleu had basically 21 major characters. And and they were in real places in real life, and I had to go, well, where was Monet on May 7th of 1780 or 1980 or 1885? So that process becomes more and less rigid depending on how much source material is behind it.
Let's see. Are there types of characters or settings that you'd like to explore in the future and that you think are underrepresented in popular storytelling?
Yeah, I like, I don't want to just be a guy who mines myth. I mean, and I've done that a lot. Don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But I think that some of the legends and myths of the northern tribes, like the Inuits and then the Lapps and all that, there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on up there, because there's not that much visually going on up there. There's a lot of black and white.
Right. You're talking about like the Eddas and stuff like
yeah,
that?
Yeah. And in fact, there's a new book out, I think this week, called Blackfish City. I can't remember the author's name. I think it's his first book, maybe second. And it's about this woman who rides into this floating city in the Arctic on an orca, followed by a polar bear. And I'm pretty sure, and I will ask this guy, it's based on Sedna, who is a Inuit sort of killer whale woman that comes in off of the ice and it has all kinds of supernatural powers and stuff like that. I think that's underrepresented, and I'd like to work a little bit with that. And I think Chinese legend and myth it's not that it's underrepresented. I think it is in Anglo text, and I think that would be a fun a fun thing to explore. Although I kind of have no desire to go to China, and I usually like to go to places that I write about, but I kind of don't want to do that with China. I don't know why. I just hear the food's really bad. But, so those are two that I'd like to take a look at.
Cool. If you had to choose characters from your books to be your two next door neighbors, who would they be and why? So these are hard questions.
I know, and it also depends on people going, "Oh, who the hell is that?"
Right.
Yeah. And there's also who would be fun and who would you really rather have neighbors, You know, it's like, I suppose I have this ancient bartender in my Pine Cove books named Mavis Sand, and she's basically over the years had all of her parts replaced, so you can almost hear servo motors when she's moving behind the bar, and she'll accidentally crush a can or something because she doesn't control her own strength. I think she'd be an interesting neighbor to have. Probably not fun because she yells a lot.
Right.
That would certainly be one. And
would you like to live near a certain pawn shop from one of your books?
I kind of do live near that. Yeah, I mean that's probably 4 blocks from my house, but it's not a real thing. Yeah, I think living next to Secondhand. What's the name? Asher's Secondhand.
Yeah.
Would be an interesting place to go, because it sounds like he has a lot of interesting items too, and you could just go in there and buy human souls and then sell them on the black market and stuff.
eBay, big market.
Yeah, eBay humans.
eBay.
Well, I had in my last Secondhand Souls book, there is a guy who's selling souls on eBay. It's what I introduced to it, from the first book, where they're selling everything out of old record stores and old secondhand stores, and it's like there's a guy who works in a hospice, and he's going to sell them on eBay, and it's like the other guys are horrified at that.
Who was the record store guy in the first book?
Minty Fresh?
Yes, I have a friend who swore she was going to name her kid that just because it was like the best name she ever ran across.
I got that from some toothpaste commercial in the 90s. And there was one of those like improbable blondes, perfect blondes that brushes her teeth, and there's like a sparkling star form that makes that sparkling noise, and she goes, "I'm Minty Fresh," and I went, "Yes, you are." And you sort of as a novelist, that you table something and you go, "I may never use that, but I'm gonna write it down."
Yes,
and then there was a point where I think Minty Fresh first appears in Coyote Blue, and they only know him as MF because he's 7 feet tall and he wears these improbable mint green suits, and he's a badass. He has golden eyes and so forth, and nobody will ask him what the MF stands for. But then there's a whole backstory of how his entire family was like a Crest toothpaste test family. So he's got like a sister named Ginger for gingivitis, and then a sister named Flossie, and so they're all like dental health names, and he got Minty Fresh. And in Secondhand Souls, you meet his cousin, Lemon. And it's just, I write comedy, what can I say?
It's fun, man. Yeah. Which of your books would you recommend as an introduction to a book club?
Wow, a lot of them do Lamb because it's the story of Jesus retold, and it sort of challenges people's preconceptions. And it's not an attack book. It's just the story. It's like Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
If Tom Sawyer was Jesus,
right?
Yeah, it's a story about friends, and I didn't set out to question anybody's religion, but it tells the story that it humanizes this person who's supposed to be human. That's a good one to do for a book club.
And you did a lot of research for that.
You
actually went.
I went to Israel. Yeah, it was 3 years of academic research. For a guy they didn't know where he was for 2/3 of his life.
Yeah.
There's a lot written, and none of it's verified. Mm-hmm. So the biggest thing is throwing out the stuff that they don't know, which is almost everything.
Right.
But learning about the world of the time, the Roman history, the Chinese history, the Indian Asian history, Nepal history, Afghanistan, all that, and figuring out what society was at the time. That was a lot of work. And then I went to Israel for like a month, and as there almost always is, there was like political stuff going on at the time, and and my wife convinced me. I said, I'm not going to go. My people I'm writing about have been dead for 2,000 years, and she goes, you always get something that you didn't know you were going to get. You need to go.
It's true.
And so I went they had travel agencies in those days. It was 1999, and I said, look, I want footsteps of Jesus. I want to get in, get out, nobody gets hurt. And so they put me on a bus full of white people from Canada and New Zealand and Australia and England. And they drove us around Israel telling us what we were looking at, because most of it looks like piles of rocks, but then they go, oh no, that's a temple, or that's a synagogue. And so I spent about a month in Israel, and then like 3 years of academic research on that.
Very good. Would you ever consider setting a novel in Ohio? Considering your feelings that you just expressed.
I know I came off way more bitter, and that's just Trump reaction. That's really not. Ohio's fine, and people in Ohio are lovely. It's just that I don't like that being thrown in my face like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Because we're coastal elites, right?
Of course.
Yeah, we're coastal elites, and it's like, no, really, I still have to go get groceries and put gas in my car and do all the things everybody else does.
Yeah.
And I come from where you come from, so shut up.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I understand.
But I think probably there'll be flashback scenes, to Ohio.
Okay. We have Joe from Des Moines on the phone for you.
Joe
will we be able
Des Moines.
to hear this? All right.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad you called, because I'm never coming to Des Moines.
Why?
Well, because you guys are mad at us. Anyway.
Well, we love you here.
Oh, well, thank you.
My wife was nice enough to get this book for me, and being a smart ass, she also submitted the question, wanting to know what nice thing I could do for her in return.
Oh, and I'm supposed to answer that?
I've been married 32 years. I'm open to suggestions.
I think you should answer that, to be quite honest with you. I think you should let her read it first.
There you go.
There you go. Was that the total pimp the book answer? Yeah, the total pimp the book. Or you should read it aloud to her. I get that all the time.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, I'm a horrible reader aloud, but I trust you.
All right, I will do my best.
Okay. Do you have any other questions I can help you with? Any inside Iowa tips I can give you? Since I've never set foot there.
I don't know. I'm awestruck here.
Oh, okay. Well, I do that to people, especially on the phone. What's the weather like in Des Moines today?
Today it's actually like 50 degrees, which is a warm spell.
That's balmy. You guys have been having snow and stuff, right?
Yeah. We've had third winter.
Nice.
And we're moving on. So yeah, good choice for not coming, but
Yeah, honestly, the only reason I've never come to Iowa is no one's ever asked. People people write me all the time and they go, "Why don't you come to New Orleans?" And I'm like, "I'd love to come to New Orleans, but nobody's ever asked me to come to New Orleans."
They always blame the writer. For
It's like my fault.
Yeah, right.
Yes, exactly. It's all your fault.
Yeah. Why aren't you coming to Canada? The Canadians are really bitter. Why don't you ever come to Canada? And it's like, dude, you've got to ask me to come to Canada.
Yeah.
There's got to be someone with a bookstore that'll sponsor, or these lovely people from Premier Live. So we do this for you, Joe.
We will work on that.
Cool.
Excellent.
Thank you for calling. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for taking the call.
All right. Tell your wife she's the best in the West 10 times.
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to say that to my wife, and it didn't work for me either. Take care.
All right. This is one I was actually curious about. I love the way you often cross over your characters. Do you think we'll see the reemergence of Biff anytime soon? And you want to tell people who Biff is?
Biff is Christ's best friend who was written out of the Gospels because he was such a rascal. So he would have been the 14th apostle, basically, with Mary Magdalene being the 13th. I get asked all the time if I do a sequel to Lamb, and I really and I'm not closed to sequels. Obviously, I've done them, and usually by demand. But I don't see a win-win on a sequel to Lamb because people are going to read it and they're going, it was good, but it wasn't as good as Lamb.
Yeah.
And I just don't see being able to come up with a better story than what a lot of people call the greatest story ever told. So if Biff shows up, I'm not going to see it coming. But also, I've had other characters a character showed up in Lamb that I never saw coming back, but I needed a demon, and I had one that hadn't been doing anything since my first book. So it could happen. I just don't have it planned.
All right. Sam Spade or Mike Hammer?
Sam Spade.
All right. No.
He's a San Franciscan.
I'm not going to ask that one. I can't pronounce that one, so we're not going to do that. What's your personal favorite book and why?
Of mine? Are we assuming
This is your
that?
personal. No, I think it's a book you love to
Of
read.
any book?
No pressure.
Cannery Row from John Steinbeck. It's written. I was put off of Steinbeck for years because they make you read Of Mice and Men in high school, and it was so horrible. You like these guys and you get attached to them, and then it's spoilers. It's horrible. And so I didn't read Steinbeck for like 10 years. Then I had a girlfriend when I was in my 20s who said, "You've got to read this book," and I read Cannery Row. And Steinbeck had such a sweet way of writing about flawed people, and it was funny and sort of descriptive, but not to where it puts you to sleep. And so for years, when I would get stuck on a book, I would read a few chapters of Cannery Row and then the sequel to that, Sweet Thursday. So that's still my favorite, just because it's so. I had a friend who said Steinbeck wrote like a benevolent God. It's how you wanted God to think about you.
Right.
It was just sweet, these really flawed people that he was completely forgiving toward. And it took an edge off of my humor, which was a little bit too biting when I was coming up. It was a little bit too, I was trying too hard to be a smartass, and I would sort of take it out of my characters. And I realized it was much better to be kind to them and let them get themselves in trouble. So that's my favorite.
It's nice that you said that you have a book you go back to when you're having problems. I have a few of those too, and I find it an interesting process to kind of get that inspiration back.
Right. And sometimes the voice isn't going to work. I mean, the way I was writing, when I was writing about coastal California on the Central Coast, which is sort of rural, the voice in Steinbeck's books was perfect. But when I'm writing urban stuff or Shakespearean stuff, that doesn't work.
Right.
And so if I need a touchstone with Shakespearean stuff, I'll read Romeo and Juliet. But I do there's no doubt that there's people that they did it right.
Yeah.
And you read them at a point where you almost committed it to memory, and you can go, let's go see what he did. And now that you've got your own voice, you think, well, I'm not going to do it that way, but that still gives you guidance because you're going somewhere else. And definitely. And I don't even like the Steinbeck's masterpieces, Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, but his comic novels are awesome. So,
I used to do this when I was starting out, and I would get nervous about my own writing. I kept books around I hated. Did you ever try that technique? When I felt like I don't know how to write anymore, I would read something that I just loathed that got published, And it's like, I might suck, but that sucks too. Maybe I can publish my stuff.
No, dude, when I was writing my first book, and it was totally, obviously on spec, and I was writing it by hand at a diner because I didn't have room for a desk in the room I rented, and I kept a copy of Judith Krantz's Princess Daisy.
There you go.
On my nightstand, and whenever I thought I'm never gonna do this, I can't do it, I'm horrible, I would read a couple pages of Judith Krantz, and I'd go, oh my God, I'm gonna so own this whole genre. I'm so good, And she sold tens of millions of books, So yeah, I have definitely done that. I don't do it anymore.
Right.
I mean, anymore, I'm just like, please let this not be awful. And I'm sure you experienced that too.
Absolutely. But I think it's actually a weird, good tip for new writers is to keep things around that you hate.
Every book reveals perfection, either by what it is or what it is not.
There you go.
It's Buddhist writing.
All right. I've been told that you're going to participate in this bit of torture. 22 questions in 2 minutes.
Piece of cake.
All right, man. Here we go. We already did this one. Where were you born?
Toledo.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Tom Hanks.
What was your first job?
Strawberry picker.
What is your greatest accomplishment?
16 novels.
What is your biggest fear?
Dying alone in a cardboard box cradle in the urine, so copies of my books.
What is the one thing you need to have in your fridge at all times?
Cream for coffee.
Who is the most interesting person you've met recently?
A guy who lives in Compton and rides horses in the hood.
Nice.
Yeah, it was very cool.
How do you take your coffee?
Cream and sweetener, or sugar and cream. But right now I'm on a diet, so cream and fake sugar.
I wouldn't answer this one myself, but try this. What is your middle name?
Kelly.
All right. What is your biggest pet peeve?
Hypocrisy.
What is your favorite hobby?
Writing. I guess is it a hobby? I guess it's a job now.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, photography.
There you go. What is your guilty pleasure? I hate guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure or it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if there's guilt involved, then what good is it? I like cheesy comedies, TV and stuff like that. Yeah, I like binge watching some horrible British comedy. I know.
Have you watched?
No, go ahead. Oh, we're stop the clock.
Okay. Now that
Get back
we've
to
done
it.
this,
Yeah.
I completely blanked. All right. Do you have any hidden talents?
Used to be able to juggle.
Oh, nice. What color is your toothbrush?
Blue and white.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
The latter. I'm a night owl, but I do most of my writing in the morning.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah.
I can't do that. Tough one. What is your worst habit?
Smoking, but I don't smoke anymore. It was my worst habit.
These days?
I don't know. Getting distracted.
What was the last gift you gave?
Flowers.
What is the last album you bought or streamed?
Jesus. It was a Coltrane album, I think. Pretty sure. Yeah. When I was writing Noir, I bought a lot of jazz.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. What is your favorite thing to cook?
Pasta, homemade like lasagna and stuff like that. I like to make the noodles. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, tagliatelle and cheese sauce. Yeah.
Nice. What cause is dear to your heart?
I give a lot of money to MS and lately social justice causes like the ACLU.
Yeah.
That's feeling like we're being a little threatened in that respect.
Right. Let's see. Name anything on your bucket list.
I'd like to swim with a whale shark. Dive with a whale shark. I've never done that. Yeah.
Cool. I think they're fascinating. I have a slight fear that things are going to go wrong and they're just going to swallow me.
I've been in the water with humpbacks, which was one of the reasons I wrote Fluke, and it was a transcendent experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next thing up is whale shark.
And if you get swallowed by a dinosaur, it's a good way to go.
You know what? And that's the other thing is if I get killed by a whale shark, everybody can go, that's how he would have wanted to go.
Exactly. And your name will be in the paper.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Exactly. Where do you want to go that you've never been?
I've never been to Spain. I'd like to go to Spain. Yeah.
Orson Welles said Sevilla is the greatest city in the world.
I want to do that. I want to see the Alhambra, which is down in Granada.
Oh,
I think.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I want to go to Barcelona. I want to go to Madrid. I've just, I've seen a lot of Europe, but I haven't been to Spain.
I want to see the...
Yeah.
You did the 22
Did we
man.
made it? Did anybody see it? We made it.
We made it. Oh, yeah, when we have time left. I'm not going to ask a cheese question. Did you worry about the reaction for Lamb when it came out?
Yeah, I thought that there would be. I didn't worry in the point that it stopped me, but I thought there might be some blowback on it. And if you read the afterword in the original, in the first edition, it's a lot of "sorry, kidding."
Yeah.
But as it turned out, the reaction was completely opposite of that. Even from people of faith. I mean, they teach it in at least a dozen seminaries that I know of, including Harvard Divinity, and they would not let me into
nice.
Harvard on a threat. So, but they're teaching my book there, so it's pretty awesome.
Did you have anything? Because I've gotten some weird blowback from people.
No, I got nothing.
Cool.
Nothing negative. I think in
That's really nice.
What is it? 15 years since it's been out. 16 years since it's been out. I've maybe gotten 4 negative emails, and 3 of them were from people that didn't read it. And,
I get those, yeah.
And they just
didn't like
the idea of it, which was what happened with Last Temptation when it was a big deal. The people who didn't like Last Temptation didn't ever see the movie,
right?
And realized that none of that happens. That's the temptation,
right?
We're
talking about the Last Temptation of Christ.
Last Temptation of Christ.
Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, Kazantzakis' book.
Novel.
And it's basically the devil presents what Jesus' life would be like if he wasn't the Son of God.
Right.
And it'd be happy family and, all the things that a normal human would have. And everybody was mad that it's like, Jesus can't have sex. And it's like, he doesn't.
Right.
It's just the devil says this is what it would be like. And it was people just being stupid. So, and then I had one from a Catholic Monsignor in Montreal who said that he was retired and said that he didn't think that it cleaved to Catholic theology, and I'm like, well, duh. But nothing threatening or negative or freaked out or book burning. We got to the point where we were like sending it to Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Falwell and
trying to get
Fox News, and like, can you believe this blasphemy? And no one would buy it. I was telling my friends in Ohio, I'll buy the books if you'll burn them, and nobody would buy it.
Here's an Ohio question, but I'm going to ask a different Ohio question. When I asked you if you studied writing there, you said you studied anthropology, and that it helped you seeing people and relationships. You want to talk about that? Yeah,
it was the great thing. I mean, I always wanted to skip all the academia, and that's what you find out when you say, I want to be an anthropologist. They're like, you're in school for about 9 years now, dude, plus get in the field. And I found out that wouldn't work. I think I wrote you in a note about that. But what it did teach me was to not impose my culture on other people's cultures, was to look at them from their own cultures. And when I started writing novels, that really allowed me to do that. I mean, I lived on Crow Reservation for Coyote Blue. I went to the most remote islands in Yap, which is way out in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific, and lived with them for a while for Island of the Sequin Love Nun. And I was okay. And what prepared me for that was to not go in and say, this is not at all like Ohio. Right. And I mean, and that's happened to me being in city, like in Paris, and sitting in a cafe in Paris with my wife, and having everybody being so angry because it's not like Oklahoma City. And I'm like, that's not their goal. And that's how you have to be with other cultures. So I don't know that I would have had that kind of perspective without an anthropology background. And that's really served me better than anything I've learned as far as the craft goes, with most of which I've taught myself. Although I had some good teachers, as I wrote you, in extension courses from UCSB. But anthro is really, it's sort of how to observe. Yeah.
And you travel, and I always found, I think for writers, traveling is like one of the essential tools. Just getting out of your world, getting out of not the rut, but the things you're accustomed to.
Well, and reaction. Comedy for me is reaction. And the time that and my default reaction is going to be to say something funny, even if I'm afraid.
Right.
And so when I am in a new environment and seeing new things, and then immediately the funny thing is going to occur to me, and that's what I'm going to write down to take home. Not take pictures of the details or write down how tall something was, but what was my initial reaction to it.
Yeah.
So going into these other environments and seeing new things, living in Paris or going to the Pacific Islands, and boom, then that's where I'm going to get the comedy from initially, is reacting to that. And it's also when you find what's cool.
Yeah.
Like there's this sort of this mishmash. What's Pacific Island culture like? Well, it's different. There's tens of thousands of islands in the Pacific. When you get into a certain chain of islands and a certain culture, then it becomes more specific, and then you can react to it and talk about it and write about it. So travel is getting you out of your own environment is a good thing. And as we talked earlier, you spend so much time as a writer in a room by yourself. And you've got to go out and get grist for the mill.
Yeah.
You've got to go. I mean, I've been doing this 30 years now, and I don't know if I can produce everything from inside. I've got to have something to fire the spark plugs, I guess.
Do you ever write outside the home? Because I found myself writing more in going out, actually writing in cafes and stuff, which is such a cliche, but to leave my office.
I wrote my first 3 books exclusively at the counter of a diner.
Okay.
And the first one by hand, with like big chief notepads. And then when I get stuck, I change locations.
Okay.
I used to in the city. It's a walking thing. I'll walk to this cafe, and it doesn't have to be special. It can be a Starbucks or whatever. And I always love when they do jokes about, hey, you're working on your screenplay, or you're working on your novel. It's no, bitch, I am working on my novel. Yeah,
exactly.
If I'm stuck, I'll walk to a cafe or something. I'll sit down. I'll look at a notebook. I'll have a cup of coffee. I'll kind of look at everything that's distracting and keep coming back to it. And if that doesn't work, I'll get up and I'll walk to the next place.
Right.
But I do find that my surroundings are a good thing sometimes to change.
Absolutely. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to remind you that you can still order signed copies at noirlive.com, and we're just about done. You've survived.
Cool. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, man.
Appreciate it.
Real pleasure.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed our yammering, and buy a bunch of books, man.
Buy Richard Cadre's books. He's got a bunch, and so you can hold yourself over until I can write another.
So make us both rich.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
That's what we want. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you.